Welcome to this video about percentages. We're going to talk about percentages but in the context of finance. So basically percentages using money. Now what we're going to do is look at specifically things like interest, how to calculate interest. We're going to call it compound interest because what happens over the course of a number of years is that you don't get the same amount of interest all the time. That interest grows because the money in your account will increase year on year. So let's say, for example, you will start with £500. You have £500 at the start. Let's say you have a 10% interest rate, and the bank then, that means the bank will give you 10% extra every year, 10% added on. So year one, at the end of year one, you'll have the £500 plus 10%. Now that 10% is basically, you can get rid of that and make it 50. That's our £50, because 10% is the same as £50. Which gives us a grand total of 550 at the end of year one. Now year two, we got £50 in the first year, but we're not going to get £50 in the second year because we now have this amount. We don't have 500, we've got 550. So we've got the original 550 plus 10%. It's still 10%, it's still the same thing, but 10% is no longer £50. 10% is now £55. Now you can see the interest amount is increasing. So that's going to be £605. Okay. This idea is called compound interest. Compound because the value is really compounded, it's added to. So you have 500 first of all, but you don't have the same amount of interest year on year. We start with 500, we add 10%, we get 550. We then add 10% of 550 to get 605. That's why it's called compound interest, because the amounts change. The percentage doesn't, but the amount does. It compounds, it adds to what's already there. Have a go at these two questions before you move on to the next slide. Pause the video now and have a go at using the same method as I have on the left hand side. £700 plus 2 years at 20%, so you'll do year on year, add 20% each time, and £800 at plus 2 years of interest at 5%, so work out 5%, add it on, work out another 5% of your new value, and add that on, see what you get. Okay, this is just in shorthand at the top, the figures you should have got. If you'd started with 700, add 20%, which is £140, giving you 840, add another 20%, but that's 20% of 840, that gives you a total of £1,008. If you do the same for 800, add 5%, which is 40, that gives you £840. Now add 5% of that, that's £42, you get a total of £882. Right, now, what we want to consider is what happens if we have an example like this, where we have an amount of money, say £2,000, and we are adding, let's say, a small percent, let's do 5% again. And what we're doing is adding 5%, which is compound interest, so the values are going to increase each year for 20 years. That's obviously going to increase the size of our calculation quite a lot. What we need to be able to do is use the information in the question, so we have to use this somehow, 2,000. We also have to use 20, because that's how many times our interest is happening. But we also need to use this 5 in some way, and this is the important thing, how we use this 5%. whatever we start with, we have the whole thing. So we're saying that £2,000, that amount, is our 100%. Now year on year, we're adding 5% in. So if this happens, if we've got 100% and we add 5% each year, that gives us, let's get rid of that arrow, that gives us, let's put it up here, 100 plus 5%, that gives us year on year 105%. What we're going to do is use that 105% in our calculations. The best thing to do is write it, the most efficient way is to write it as a decimal. Now that 1.05 comes from doing our original 100% plus our 5%. On our calculator, if we're not sure, we could do 1 plus 5 over 100. Now we all know, or should know, that 5 over 100 is 5%. 1 is the whole thing, it's like 100 over 100. So we've got 105 over 100, which works out as 1.05. This is what we call our multiplier. That's going to help us make this kind of thing, where we've got more than a number of years, say 2 years or 3 years, which we can do with a straightforward calculation like this. This is okay, but for 20 years it's going to become much, much more difficult because it's going to take so much longer. This multiplier happens 20 times. But instead of writing 1.05 times 1.05 times 1.05, because that's what we essentially do, we're going to take that £2,000 and we're going to times it by 1.05. That has the effect of adding to our original 100 an extra 5%. Because timesing by 1 doesn't change it, that's the amount we've got. Adding that 5% in, which is what we've got here, 1.05, that will increase the value by 5%. But we don't want it just for 1 year, we want it for 20 years. So we're going to do 1.05, oh, I'm bored already. 1.05, 1.05. Right, no, let's not bother with that. No. We've got to streamline it, so it's going to be much, much easier. We're going to do the same kind of thing, but we know that we're going to times by 1.05 20 times. That's like saying we do that multiplication 20 times to the power 20. And whatever answer is, that gives us our value. That tells us how much is now in the account. That works out as 5,000, let's put a pound sign in as well, £5,306, rounding it up to 60 pence. Now, if you're not sure where this 20 comes from or how to do it on the calculator, you should be looking for this box here. On a scientific calculator, it would be something like X and then you've got some box here. So you'll do 2,000 times 1.05, then you'll use this button, then you'll do the 20, and that gives you that answer there, 5,306.60, and that is how much you've got in your account after 20 years at 5% on £2,000. That's pretty good. That's if you can wait £20 to get your money back out. I'm just going to write down another example for you to follow through, and then I'll give you some examples later on this page. So let's say we have £350 and the interest rate is 6% and the time span is going to be 5 years. Now the main thing is we always start with 100% because that's the value, that's the amount, or the value of that amount going into the bank. So it's 100% plus 6%. That basically tells us our multiplier. That's 106%, which works out as a decimal 1.06. So to get the new amount, the whole amount in the account after 5 years at 6% on £350, that's going to be 350 times 1.06, and that's the bit, this bit here, this 1.06 is the bit we do 5 times. So instead of writing out 1.06 times 1.06, etc., etc., 5 times, you could do if you wanted to, but I don't think it's the best use of your time. Best thing to do is to just do it once. I'll rewrite that one. 1.06, we're doing it 5 times to the power of 5. It's up to you whether you put the brackets in. I just like it to keep that neat. So 350 times 1.06 to the power of 5 is, wait for it, £468 and 38 pence. Okay. If you want just the interest, you'll do 468 minus the original amount, 468.38 minus your original 350, which is going to be £118.38. So you get an extra nearly 120 quid at 6% for 5 years on that £350. Even that's not too bad. Right. Pause the video once you've seen the questions and have a go at them yourself. Have a go at these questions. Pause the video now, have a go at them, and check the answers. All we're looking for is the new amount, the whole thing. Not the interest, but the whole thing. To work out the new amounts on all these values, 600, 8,000 and 400. Pause the video now, and then when you restart it, you'll see the answers on the right hand side. Here are the answers on the right hand side. Now, if you were slightly stuck on question part C, this 6.3%, you're still adding it to 100%, so it's 100 plus 6.3, that gives you 1.063. Okay? That is your multiplier, so you'll do 400, which is the amount, times 1.063 to the power 8. And remember, the power button is that x with a square. Sometimes, depends how old your calculator is, you might see that kind of thing. Or it could be x to the power y. There could be a y there instead of a box. But that's the kind of thing you're looking for. Any problems? Just ask me.